For centuries, humanity's legends were nothing more than stories, mere whispers in the dark fantasies that aliens across the galaxy laughed off as quaint, even ridiculous. To them, humans were an insignificant species, nothing more than a primitive race lost in the depths of time. But legends have a way of becoming more than just stories. They evolve, they grow, and sometimes they appear when least expected. Zara, an advanced alien historian from the Andromeda Cluster, had spent her life studying the myriad civilizations of the galaxy. She had scoffed at the old tales of human heroism, dismissing them as exaggerated myths told by a species that once believed it could fly. To Zara, she had seen countless worlds rise and fall, civilizations grow and collapse, and never once had she thought there might be some truth buried in the stories of Earth. But everything changed when she was sent on a mission to a forgotten corner of the galaxy, a planet that humans had once called home, a planet that had long been abandoned by the galaxy's elite, relegated to the status of an obscure footnote in history. Zara was tasked with documenting the remnants of Earth's old cities, where humanity's greatest achievements had faded into ruins. What she didn't expect was to find something that would challenge everything she knew about the human race. On a desolate stretch of land, Zara stumbled upon an ancient battlefield, the ground scarred by the weight of countless years. There, hidden among the ruins, something caught her eye: a figure. A human, battered and bruised, yet alive. Zara's scanners couldn't identify the individual's biological signature, and a chill ran down her spine. She had encountered many strange beings in her time, but this one was different. It wasn't the usual frail human form she had come to expect. This was something else entirely. As she approached, the figure stirred, his eyes opening to meet hers. A quiet tension hung in the air as Zara's heart raced. This wasn't supposed to be possible. Humanity had long been believed extinct in this region. But here he was, a living testament to everything Zara had written off as mere legend. In that moment, Zara realized she was staring at the one thing she never thought she'd see: a human warrior, someone who had survived against all odds. A creature of myth, right before her eyes. Her mind raced. Was this some kind of anomaly? Or had Earth's stories held truths beyond her understanding? Zara's breath caught in her throat as the man slowly rose to his feet. With every step he took toward her, the weight of humanity's forgotten strength pressed down on her. But before she could speak, the ground beneath them trembled. A low hum filled the air as a massive shadow loomed overhead. Zara's eyes widened in horror. What had she just awakened? And why was it now staring at them both, its intentions unclear? The shadow above them grew, casting an eerie darkness over the battlefield. Zara's heart thudded in her chest, a surge of panic rising. She had seen many things in her travels across the galaxy, but this was something far beyond her experience. The massive shape didn't belong in this region of space. There had been no recorded presence of anything like it near Earth for centuries. Yet here it was, descending rapidly toward them. The human, still standing with his unyielding gaze locked on her, seemed unaffected by the ominous presence overhead. His body was battered, his clothes torn, but there was an undeniable power about him, an aura of quiet defiance that made Zara feel both small and insignificant. His movements were slow but deliberate, as if he had been through 1,000 battles and was unfazed by the horrors of the universe. Zara's instincts screamed at her to run, to flee, but she couldn't tear her eyes away from the figure before her. She had to understand. Who was he? How was he alive? And why did he seem so different from every other human she had studied? The man's expression softened slightly as he saw her struggle, his voice gravelly as he spoke. "You don't need to be afraid." His words were simple, but there was a weight to them, like a promise. "I've been through worse." Zara's confusion deepened. Worse than this? Worse than an alien warship that seemed to be targeting them both? Her mind raced, trying to make sense of the impossible. The last recorded human survivors from Earth had been wiped out decades ago. This man couldn't be one of them, but his words there was something familiar about them, something that resonated in a way Zara couldn't quite grasp. As the massive ship loomed closer, Zara felt the vibrations beneath her feet intensify. The air became thick with tension, the sound of the ship's engines deafening as it hovered above them. The shadows it cast seemed to warp the very fabric of reality around them, creating a distorted and almost surreal atmosphere. "Who are they?" Zara asked, her voice barely audible over the roar of the ship. The man didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked up at the ship, his eyes narrowing as if he were sizing up an old enemy. "The Galathians," he muttered under his breath, almost as if he were speaking to himself. "They've come back for what they think is theirs." Zara's mind raced. The Galathians were known across the galaxy as one of the most brutal and technologically advanced races. They had once tried to claim Earth, but had been repelled by the human defenses. Or so the history books said. But if they had returned, why? And why now? She looked back at the man, desperate for answers. "How do you know them? Why are they targeting us?" The human's gaze flickered with a flash of something anger, pain, before he spoke again. "Because they never forget. They never forgive. And they never leave." His words hung in the air, heavy with a truth that Zara wasn't ready to accept. Just then, the ship's engines roared louder, and the ground trembled beneath them. Zara instinctively stepped back, her eyes scanning the skies for any sign of escape. But there was nowhere to go. The ship had them cornered, and the man this human was their only hope. But what could one lone survivor possibly do against the might of the Galathians? Zara didn't have time to question it, as the first volley of energy blasts lit up the sky, striking the ground around them with devastating force. The man moved quickly, pulling Zara behind a pile of rubble as the blasts continued to rain down. She looked up at him, her voice trembling with uncertainty. "What now?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stood tall, his expression hardening with resolve. "We fight." And then, from the depths of the alien ship, something began to emerge. A figure larger than the human stepped onto the battlefield, its presence sending a wave of dread through Zara's body. This wasn't just any soldier. This was something far worse. The man beside her clenched his fists, ready for what was to come. The figure that emerged from the Galathian ship was unlike anything Zara had ever seen. Standing nearly twice the height of a human, it was armored in dark, shimmering plates that reflected the light of the dying sun. Its eyes, glowing a faint red, scanned the battlefield with a cold, calculating gaze. Every movement it made was deliberate, measured, as if it were a predator sizing up its prey. Zara felt a chill run down her spine. This wasn't just a soldier, this was a general. The man beside her seemed to recognize the gravity of the situation. His face hardened as he watched the Galathian leader advance, the muscles in his jaw clenching with silent fury. Zara noticed something else. His hands were shaking, not with fear, but with anticipation. This wasn't the first time he had faced these enemies. He knew them, and from the way his eyes flicked toward her, she could tell he was about to do something reckless. Something that could very well end their lives. "Stay back," he warned her, his voice low and urgent. "This is my fight, not yours." But Zara couldn't just stand by. The Galathians were the galaxy's most brutal conquerors. They had a history of annihilating any species they deemed weak, and humanity, despite their resilience, had always been seen as expendable. This human, had survived something Zara couldn't even begin to understand. If he was willing to fight, she couldn't just watch. She needed to know what he was capable of. The man turned to face the Galathian general, who now stopped just a few yards away, its massive frame blocking out the dimming sky. The general's voice boomed across the field, its tone harsh and guttural. "You should have stayed dead, human. Your kind are no longer welcome here." Zara watched as the human's eyes narrowed, his stance growing even more rigid. There was a strange calmness to him now, as if the chaos around them didn't faze him. "We'll see about that," he muttered under his breath. Before Zara could respond, the general's hand shot forward, releasing a blast of energy that rippled through the air. The man dodged effortlessly, moving with speed that defied human limitations. Zara's breath caught in her throat as he closed the distance between himself and the Galathian general, a blinding flash of movement that seemed impossible. But the general was no slouch either. It raised its arm, summoning a barrier of energy to deflect the human's strike. The impact was deafening. Sparks flew in all directions as the two combatants collided in a violent clash of raw power. Zara could hardly keep up, her mind struggling to process the sheer force of their movements. Every punch the human threw was met with a counterstrike from the general, and yet, despite the disparity in size and strength, the human held his ground. Zara's pulse quickened. Was this truly the same species that the galaxy had written off as weak and fragile? This man, this human, seemed to embody the very legend Zara had dismissed. She could see the pain in his movements, the weariness in his eyes, but there was something else too, a deep, unshakable will to survive. To protect. It was a fire that refused to be snuffed out, no matter how impossible the odds. Suddenly, the ground beneath them trembled again, more violently this time. Zara stumbled, trying to regain her footing, but the air was growing thick with an oppressive force, like the atmosphere itself was being warped. Her eyes darted upward just in time to see the ship's cannons charging once more, its immense power focused directly on the battlefield. Zara's heart sank. They were about to fire. A single blast from that ship could erase them both. The human looked up, his gaze flicking toward the sky. For a moment, he seemed to hesitate. Then, without a word, he leapt toward the Galathian general once more, his body moving with a speed that made Zara's head spin. But she could already hear the hum of the ship's cannons charging. They wouldn't make it in time. "Get down!" Zara shouted, pulling the man away from the blast zone. But he barely reacted, his focus solely on his opponent. There was no time to think. The ground shook with the full force of the cannon's blast, a blinding light enveloping everything. Zara felt herself being thrown backward, her body slamming into the cold ground. Pain exploded in her head as the world around her fractured into chaos. When her vision cleared, she could see nothing but smoke and debris. The Galathian ship had vanished from view, and the battlefield lay in ruin. She scrambled to her feet, coughing from the dust and rubble. Where was the man? Was he still alive? Had he? Suddenly, a figure appeared through the haze, tattered, battered, but unmistakably alive. But something was wrong. The human's eyes were no longer the same. They were cold, empty. A look of confusion crossed his face as he staggered forward, his hand clutching his side. Zara's heart stopped. This wasn't the same warrior she had seen moments before. Who are you?" she whispered, fear creeping into her voice. The man didn't answer. Zara's pulse hammered in her ears as she watched the man stumble through the smoke, his every step uncertain. His movements had slowed, and his once steadfast gaze now seemed lost, as though he were searching for something, anything familiar in the chaos around him. The air was thick with dust, the remnants of the blast still hanging in the atmosphere like a fog of uncertainty. Zara's heart skipped a beat as she struggled to make sense of what she was seeing. This couldn't be the same human she had watched fight with such unrelenting determination. "Hey!" Zara called out, rushing toward him, but her voice barely carried through the haze. She wasn't sure if he even heard her. The man's face was blank, his eyes distant, like a part of him had vanished into the storm of destruction. She reached out, her hand trembling as she touched his arm. "Are you?" But before she could finish, the ground beneath them rumbled once more, a deep, guttural growl of power that sent a shiver down Zara's spine. The Galathian ship hadn't left. It was still there, hovering just beyond the smoke, its massive form obscured in the distance. And then she saw it, a flash of movement, something large and dark shifting in the wreckage. The general was still alive, slowly emerging from the ruins of the blast, its glowing eyes scanning the battlefield. Zara's breath caught in her throat. This wasn't over. The man, her only ally, didn't seem to notice the danger. His body was trembling, his breath shallow and erratic, as if the blast had done more than just hurt him physically. Something about him felt wrong. The connection that had been so clear before was now slipping away, replaced by an unsettling emptiness. She could feel it. He wasn't the same man who had stood his ground against the Galathians. Something had shifted within him. "Come on!" Zara urged, her voice breaking through her growing panic. We need to move. They're coming. But the human didn't respond. He merely looked at her, his expression clouded, as if he were trapped in a fog. His hand reached up to touch his forehead, and for a brief moment, Zara thought she saw a flicker of recognition in his eyes. But it vanished as quickly as it appeared. And then, the ground shook again. The Galathian general was moving faster now, its armored form charging toward them with terrifying speed. Zara's instinct screamed at her to run, but she couldn't leave him. Not like this. She grabbed his arm, pulling him forward, but he resisted, his body stiff, like a stone statue. His eyes met hers, but there was no emotion in them. No spark of the man she had seen fight for his survival just moments ago. Please, she pleaded, desperation creeping into her voice. You're not alone. We can. The general was almost upon them now, its colossal form casting a shadow that swallowed the light. Zara could hear the hum of its energy weapons charging, the terrifying promise of destruction in the air. She had to make a choice. Fight or flee. But with the human frozen, she had no idea how they would survive this. Get down, she shouted, pushing him to the ground as the first blast from the general's weapon streaked toward them. The explosion sent a shockwave through the air, throwing Zara off her feet. She crashed into the rubble, her ears ringing, her vision swimming. The world around her spun as she struggled to rise. She had to get back to him. She had to find a way to get them out of this. When she finally pushed herself upright, the dust was settling, and a silence filled the air. Zara blinked, trying to clear the haze from her vision. The battlefield was a ruin, the once pristine ground now a crater of devastation. The Galathian general stood at the center, its armor cracked but still formidable, its eyes glowing brighter in the dim light. And there, lying motionless on the ground, was the human. Her heart sank. She rushed toward him, her body moving without thought, driven by the instinct to save him. As she knelt beside him, she saw the damage, the burns, the gashes, the deep cuts running through his skin. But worse than that was the look on his face. The blankness in his eyes had deepened, replaced by something colder. Darker. Zara's hand hovered over his shoulder, uncertainty flooding her veins. Please, don't, she whispered, but there was no response. The man who had once fought with everything he had was now still, like a broken shell of the warrior he had been. And then, as if in answer to her silent plea, a low growl rumbled from the Galathian general. The creature's gaze shifted toward them, and a flicker of recognition passed through its eyes. A cruel smile curled beneath the helmet of the general as it took a step forward. The human's body lay motionless, but the air was thick with the promise of something worse. Something that Zara had no way of understanding. Her hand tightened around the weapon at her side. She was on her own now. The general's voice, deep and menacing, echoed across the battlefield. This is the end, human. Zara's breath came in ragged gasps as she stood between the human and the approaching Galathian general. The air was thick with tension, the battlefield silent save for the distant hum of the warship above. The general's cruel smile grew wider, its heavy footfalls shaking the ground with each step it took toward them. Zara could feel the weight of its gaze on her, cold and unrelenting. She wasn't sure how much longer she could hold her ground. But then something shifted. The human's hand twitched. It was small, barely noticeable, but it was enough to make Zara pause. Her heart skipped a beat as she saw the faintest glimmer of recognition flicker in his eyes. He wasn't gone, not entirely. There was still something left inside him, something that hadn't been erased by the battle, the blast, or the Galathians' manipulations. Get up, Zara whispered urgently, gripping his shoulder. You're not finished yet. For a moment, nothing happened. The human remained still, his chest rising and falling shallowly. But then, with a quiet groan, he slowly pushed himself up, his body trembling from the effort. Zara helped him, her heart racing as she watched him fight to rise. The battle wasn't over yet, and they had no time to waste. The general stopped, watching the scene unfold with growing amusement. You think you can defeat me, human? Its voice boomed, low and mocking. Your kind is nothing. But the human didn't respond. He didn't need to. With a shaky breath, he reached for the weapon at his side, a battered yet still functional blade. Zara's eyes widened. She recognized it, a relic from the past, a weapon that humans had once used in their fiercest battles. It wasn't much, but it was enough for what they needed. With a strength that surprised even Zara, the human stood tall, his gaze fixed on the Galathian general. The fire that had once burned in him had returned, though it was now tempered by the brutal reality of the battle they faced. This wasn't just a fight for survival anymore. It was a fight for humanity itself. "Move," the human said, his voice hoarse but filled with determination. He stepped forward, his feet steady, his grip on the blade tightening. Zara hesitated for only a second before falling into step beside him, her own weapon raised and ready. Together, they charged. The general reacted immediately, raising its massive arm and unleashing a devastating blast of energy. The shockwave hit them both, knocking them back. Zara's head slammed against the ground, and for a moment, everything went dark. When her vision cleared, the human was already back on his feet, his eyes locked on the general. His movements were fluid, precise, and despite the heavy toll the battle had taken on him, he pressed on. Zara joined him, her body protesting, but her resolve unshakable. The final confrontation played out in a blur of motion strikes, counter-strikes, explosions of energy. The human was everywhere at once, moving with a precision that defied the odds. The general's attacks were brutal, but the human was relentless, driven by the need to protect, to fight for something greater than himself. In a moment that seemed to stretch on forever, the human finally closed the distance, his blade plunging deep into the heart of the Galathian general. The creature let out a final, guttural roar, its body convulsing as the life drained from it. And then, silence. Zara's heart hammered in her chest as she stared at the fallen general. It was over. They had won. The human dropped to one knee, his breath ragged, exhaustion evident in every line of his face. Zara knelt beside him, her hand resting on his arm, grateful but unsure of what would happen next. She didn't know how much longer he could keep fighting, or if this battle had taken too much from him. But as he looked up at her, a faint, tired smile spread across his face. "I told you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Humans, we don't give up." Zara nodded, understanding the weight of his words. It wasn't just about surviving, it was about the unbreakable will to keep going, no matter what the universe threw their way. They were far from finished, but for the first time in a long while, Zara believed they had a chance. They had proven that humanity's strength wasn't just physical, it was something deeper, something that couldn't be measured by the size of a weapon or the strength of an enemy. The battle was won, but the war was just beginning. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, Zara couldn't help but feel that no matter what came next, they would face it together. Because humans didn't just survive, they conquered. And this story was just the beginning of their legend.